The chapter for today is Finding the Christ. Interesting topic, isn't it? Finding the Christ. I didn't know he was lost. Well, we're not talking about Jesus, so we're not really talking about Jesus the Christ. We're talking about Christ, the Christ nature, the Christ consciousness that we have, and finding that within ourselves is kind of key to our whole teaching, basically. The word Christ comes from the Greek Christos, which means the anointed one. And so quite often at the time in Jesus' time, anybody who was a very holy person was considered anointed, and so therefore they were considered Christ. So it wasn't an uncommon thing for someone to be called a Christ. It was a common title for people. But the Christian church has kind of accepted that as kind of Jesus' last name in a way. So we quite often, when we hear the word Christ, think of Jesus the Christ. But it means more than that. In fact, it means for each of us the ability to reach that level of consciousness within ourselves. So that's what we're talking about today in terms of science of mind. Ernest Holmes says that each partakes of the Christ nature to the degree that Christ is revealed through him, and to the degree that he becomes the Christ. There is a point in the supreme moment of realization where the individual merges with the universe, but not to the loss of his individuality, where a sense of oneness of all life so enters his being that there is no sense of otherness. Have you reached that point in your consciousness? Are we all Christs here today? Are we all enlightened beings? Well, we probably are. Well, yes, we definitely are, but we may not be aware of it yet. And so there may be a little work for us to do. In traditional fundamental Christian, orthodoxical, dualistic, and dialectic interpretations of Christian scriptures, there are unquestionable lines between that which is divine and that which is human, that which is holy and that which is material. Jesus, as the Christ, must fall in the realm of divinity in this doctrine, and would therefore have no relevance in the human experience. But we know that's not the truth for us. So, Jesus, as the Christ, must fall in that realm, but it's not true for us. As his teachings were encouraging, we know that this is contrary to the teachings of Jesus because his teachings were encouraging those who followed him to follow his example. He was the great example, not the great exception. And thereby we could all achieve the seemingly miraculous conditions that he did. We could all become Christs as he was. His words to his people and to his followers and to us were, "Be ye gods. The kingdom of God is within you. Ye are gods. And all of you who are children of the Most High, ye are the light of the world. All that I have done, you can do, and even greater." And so on, and so on. His words were not saying that I'm the only one and you're not, body, body, boo, boo. He was saying that everything that I can do, you can do, and here's how you do it. And gave us very clear examples of how to live that life and to achieve that glorious heavenly experience that he did. So as Jesus assures his followers that all may reach the glory of heaven, the Buddha told his followers that every person may reach enlightenment, or nirvana, or Buddhahood. I think it's kind of interesting how similar their lives were in a way. You know, Jesus was born a Jew, died a Jew, never was a Christian. Buddha was born Hindu, died Hindu, never was a Buddhist. Interesting, huh? The Buddha tells his followers that every person could be the same as he was. Every person could reach enlightenment if they just followed his simple teachings. Jesus was the great rabbi to the Jews, and Buddha was the great yogi to the Hindu. And so we can use both of their teachings in terms of determining what is our Christ nature. So I thought I'd do a little switch up today and talk about the Christ nature of Buddha, or finding the Christ nature in the teachings of Buddhism, moving from the physical self to divinity. and reaching that divinity within ourselves, our enlightenment. Now, I'm going to give you a disclaimer here. I'm not an authority on Buddhism. There are probably people here that know somewhat more about Buddhism than I do. But I may take some of these Buddhist ideas and oversimplify them or whatever, but I'm applying them to science of mind principles, and so be aware of that. The Buddha says, to master the pride of defiant selfhood, that in truth is the highest bliss. Defiant selfhood. This is not denying the self, but it's recognition of the self as an integral part of the whole, of the oneness of the universe. Now we're going to start off a little bit talking about the life of Buddha. Buddha was Siddhartha Gautama, and he was born into wealth. His father was a great political figure in the area, and he grew up in a palace, and his parents wished that he should never have to suffer or have experienced pain or no poverty at all in his life, but being an adventurous young man, he did experience, when he stepped out of the palace, through the gates of the palace, he noticed that people were suffering, that people were suffering illness and pain and even death. Things he had never seen before and things that confused him. He thought, there certainly must be some way to end suffering and pain, illness, death, all those things that people are hurting over. He determined to find relief. He determined to find the answers, and if not to relief, at least to release those who were suffering, to release suffering from their lives. He tried asceticism, a life of poverty and difficulty, but he found that didn't help very much. He tried self-mutilation, and he found, well, that actually caused more pain and suffering. And he determined that those were not the answers. And so he went and finally decided, I'm going to sit under this fig tree until I come up with the answer. I'm going to sit here and meditate until I know what the answer to the relief of pain is. He sat there until he reached the point where he felt enlightened. He knew what life is, what suffering is, where it comes from, and how to overcome it. The path for endless coming into being, from worldly materialistic existence to enlightenment, to heaven, to nirvana, was his outcome. He dedicated his life to teaching others about this experience that he had and this wonderful way of relieving themselves from pain. Now, beyond reincarnation and the karmic rebirth idea, suffering is a result of endless coming into being. It's an idea that we talk about sort of in Science of Mind. We can relate to it. And this is equivalent to the consequence of manifestation of thought. We know that what we think about, we bring about, and that which we bring about, we experience in our lives, and sometimes those things cause us pain. Ernest Holmes speaks frequently about how thought, improperly used, leads to lack of freedom. We create the restrictions and the lack of freedom in our lives as a result of how we think. And so therefore we create confinement, pain, suffering. We are bound by that which we have brought into being and continue to hold on to. And that's one of the biggest Buddhist ideas, unattachment. Not holding on to stuff. Not holding on to the stuff that we have brought into our lives on our own and then continue to drag along with us. Buddha said, men are blind, unknowing, deluded by the things to which they cling, by what never is, but is forever caught up in absolute transience, in coming and going, and never-ending becoming. By never-ending becoming, I am relating that in Science of Mind of constantly creating things in our lives and then holding on to them. Constantly things renewing, and Wayne talked about rebirth, or we're creating new things and constantly creating new things in our lives. The idea is some of those things work for us, some of those things don't work for us, and we end up with a big bag of stuff that we drag along with us everywhere we go. We need to release some of this stuff and release the idea of constantly creating just so we can create. He also says, the only fundamental state of vision in which He said, it is only the fundamental state of vision in which we see the whole that transforms and saves. Salvation lies in liberation from attachment to things. That point where we see the whole, where we recognize our oneness with all that is. That is where we recognize our freedom. And how do we do that? How do we see the whole? Well, in Science of Mind, we use meditation or spiritual mind treatment. In Buddhism, meditation is the key. Meditation is aimed at transforming the image of self from a material, physical existence to a spiritual energy, to a spiritual essence. It's recognition of the true spiritual self. Buddha says, the body is not the self. Sensations are not the self. Ideas, forms, and unconscious powers of formation are not the self. Cognition, pure intellectual consciousness, is not the self. What is subject to change is not mine. It is not I. It is not myself. So we have to find out what is the self. By releasing all those things that are not the self in meditation, we can actually come to the point when we recognize, come to an awareness of what our true self is. Now, the three primary stages of meditation in Buddhism, leading to the denial of the physical sense to the awareness of the true self, which I'm going to call our Christ nature. In the first stage, the physical nature of the self is released. We let go of that idea of that I am a physical form, that's all I am. Where my body ends, that's the end of my existence. That is not the truth of who we are. So we release that and we let it go in the first stage of meditation. In the second, the personal self is in relationship with divinity. When we realize that there's more to me than this physical sense of who I am a spiritual being having a human experience, and so therefore I have a relationship with divinity. That's the second stage. In the third stage, the personal self continues to diminish until it is completely enveloped by divinity. Now that may be the stage where we quite often get caught. We don't quite make it. I think we all know that we're spiritual beings having a physical experience, but do we come to the point where we know that God is all that is and I am, so therefore God is all I am? That's a constant reminder for me to have to constantly remind myself that that's the truth of who I am. And I really need to be able to get in that stage to be able to create a productive, prosperous life. One reaches pure consciousness, Christ consciousness, Buddhahood, nirvana, whatever, when you reach that state of pure, absolute connection, oneness with the divine. Now, it's not a complete self-denial. We're not denying our physical self because we know we are still spiritual beings having physical experience. We know that we can't exactly move around in this physical environment without our physical bodies. And there's a great statement that I like: to completely dissolve the self would make one so spiritual that they would be of no earthly good or no earthly value. We still are spiritual. We're spiritual beings. We're still having the earthly experience, human experience. It's more of a complete immersion into the higher self, the capital S self. And it's awareness and acceptance of the truth of who we really are. We are spiritual beings. Now, other religions have followed these spiritual traditions. Muslims pray 5 times a day. And on each occasion, the worshipers stand facing the Kaaba in Mecca. And as the word indicates in Arabic, salah, which is what they call their prayer, translates as connection. It's designed to directly link the devotees to their Creator. When performing the prayer, an individual is considered to be standing in the hands of God and addressing God in person. Now, we may think that's a little bit extreme to have to get on our knees and pray 5 times a day. But to think about the devotion of that, the constant focus, the constant attention, the constant dedication to connect yourself to your higher source, to your higher good. How many of us actually sit down and pray, or get on our knees and pray at least 5 times a day? Or have we come to the point where it's just habitual for us, and whether every time we come into a difficult situation, we automatically do a small treatment or a small prayer, reminding ourselves, oh wait, okay, I really am connected to the divinity. Now, we had an experience just the other day, and Deborah told me I really need to use this example, and I said, no, I'm not going to do that because it really doesn't fit in. But you know, right now I feel like it really does.
It does.
But we went over to Orlando for an event, and we got out of the car and we looked down and said, oh, I have a flat tire. After I got to Orlando, it wasn't completely flat. It was almost a pancake, but not completely. I said, well, we need to get this fixed. And so we drove to a place, and it's about a mile away. And the guy says, well, yeah, we can fix that. It's not a problem, but it'll take 4 or 5 hours before we can get to it. And we didn't want to walk a mile and a half back to where we came from. So I said, well, I'll look for someplace else. And I drove around to a corner to a Publix parking lot and sat there. Found a place about 3.5 miles away. I said, I don't think I would want to drive this 3.5 miles. I said, you know what I can do? I can get out and put the spare tire on and put the other one in the back, take it over, they can fix it, put it on the car. Ready to go. Well, I did that. But I don't know, does anybody owns a Dodge? Whoever designed the Dodge didn't think this out very well, because you have to get a long rod and take your console apart inside your car and put this big long rod down and turn it about 40 times. You get the spare wheel to touch the ground. Then you have to crawl underneath the car and pull it out underneath. Meanwhile, you got a flat tire, so you can't really get underneath the car. So you got to jack the car up with this little scissors jack thing, which is about this far from the ground. So every time you hurt it, you turn it, you hit your knuckles on the ground. And the whole time, I'm spewing out swear words. And Deborah's
in your head.
And Deborah's sitting in the car. I said, David, remember your Christ consciousness. And I said, I did use that word Christ several times. Well, so I finally got it up, got it raised up, got the spare, disconnected, and put it on, and crankety, 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 crank to get it all the way down. It's flat. The spare is flat. So I still got a little bit of air in that thing, so I cranked it back up again, banging my knuckles every time. More swear words. Deborah's yelling outside the car, David, remember your Christ consciousness. Then it did help, because the more I would think positively, the more the energy seems to dispel. Anyway, I did get it on, and I finally put the thing back on and drove back to the previous place and said, you know, 4 to 5 hours has sounded pretty darn good. He says, well, 4 more cars have come in since there's, so it's going to be a little bit longer than that. So we spent our day sitting at a tire dealership, but it ended up costing me $35 because they just put a plug in it. So it was great. So anyway, in Science of Mind, our spiritual mind treatment starts with 2 steps. Sound familiar? Number 1 is, God is all that is. The second is, I am one with all that is. Is that not recognizing our Christ consciousness? This is not only the first part of every prayer, but it's the first 2 fundamental statements in our system of beliefs. God is all that is, and I am one with all that is. Now, if you just say those 2 statements and absolutely believe them, then you really don't need to treat anymore. You don't need to pray anymore because everything's done. And if you get in the middle of it and you don't feel like it's working, you can actually go back to the beginning and say, okay, God is all that is, and I am one with all that is. There is no spot where God is not. That is including me. And so therefore, I am divinity expressing in human form. I am Christ in human form expressing. So how could I possibly have a difficulty? How could I possibly have a challenge? How could I possibly have a flat tire that I need to deal with? It's just part of life. I don't attach myself to that flat tire. I don't attach myself to that piece of junk car that I have. Because actually, 5 minutes before we were saying, isn't it nice to be in our wonderful car driving with the air conditioner down in this hot day? It's part of recognition of our wholeness, our connection with all that is, the abundance of the universe, knowing that there is no issue of poverty or challenge. Everything is good. Ernest Holmes talks about the Christ nature. He says, the mystic Christ comes from the bosom of the unseen Father, proclaiming the love of God through his own humanity. This is a beautiful statement. You may want to close your eyes for a minute and just take it in. And I would like you to kind of think about applying it to yourself. He's talking about the Christ, And yeah, he's talking about Jesus the Christ, but see if you can apply it to yourself and your own Christ nature. Asleep in the heart of cosmic love, unborn, universal, potential, the Christ child lay. And the great mother's soul, brooding over her unborn child, conceived it in the stillness of her universal nature, imparting to it her own being, born into time and experience, unnoticed, unseen, yet alive and aware. The Christ child incarnated in human form, taking the likeness of men and women, yet giving no sign of its presence, waiting with utmost patience and love, the revelation that should disclose itself and proclaim the reign of peace. Many ages passed and vanished in the long yesterdays of time, and still the Christ child waited. Nations appeared and disappeared. Toil, famine, pestilence and want, hunger, cold, heat and thirst, war, hatred, blood, and ruin, and still the seed of perfection, unrevealed. But the universal wholeness cannot be forever subjected, nor cosmic love be kept from human form. That which was given must be revealed. The seed of perfection must burst. The shoots of heavenly planting must break the cords that bind, fanning the human into a blaze divine. And so the long-appointed day arrived. A voice from out the stillness spoke, "This is my beloved Son." Let the earth be still in his presence. Let the beasts of the field, the birds of the air, and all living creatures be still. Let the hosts of heaven sing praises, and let deep cry unto deep. Then spoke the child, "I am come to bring peace. I am the child of joy, and to all who will, I give life. I am formed of happiness. I am come from the eternal stillness. Quietness and confidence are mine. In the heart of the Father, I have lived forever. O nations of all people, look unto me and be saved. Behold my face shining as the sun, and my feet shod with righteousness. In my left hand are riches and honor, and in my right, peace forevermore. All that I am, all that I have, I give." I would like to read another selection from Holmes. It's called "The Triumphant Christ." The Christ knows that his individuality is indestructible, that life is an eternal being, living forever in the bosom of the Father. The Christ triumphs over death and the grave, breaking through the tomb of human limitation into the dawn of eternal expansion. The Christ arises from the ashes of human hopes, pointing the way to a greater realization of life. The Christ is always triumphant, is ever victor, is never defeated, needs no companion. The Christ places his hand in the outstretched hand of the universe and walks unafraid through life. Through the long night watches, his hand clasps mine. At the break of dawn, his hand clasps mine. In the daytime of work and endeavor, from eternity to eternity, his hand clasps mine. When time shall pass, when eternity shall be strewn about like fallen petals, and space and world shall be swallowed up in everlasting blessedness, his hand will clasp mine. As we look into ourselves and recognize our wholeness with that energy, we achieve an awareness of our Christ nature, our Christ consciousness. So this week, consciously seek the Christ within you. And remember, it isn't really a long journey because you're already there. So it is.